Hello, friends, and welcome to another brand new episode of Discourse and Magic. This is episode 148 with magician Steve Cohen. Actually, millionaire magician Steve Cohen, which might be how you've heard of him. You might have heard of him because of his chamber magic show, which has done over 5,000 performances in New York. But now he also has multiple books out, graphic novels, and he's just an incredible magician. And we talk all about making your magic better, how to make the best magic that you can, as well as some marketing or business advice for putting together a show like that. I just really enjoyed myself, and if you care about magic or care about performing your best or putting on shows that are your best, I think you're really going to love this episode. So here it is, episode 148 with millionaire magician Steve Cohen. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah, and we are here with a very special guest. He is one of the most exciting people in magic right now, with books, with graphic novels. You guys are going to love him. Here he is, Steve Cohen. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me onto the show.
I'm super excited to have you on. Let's start at the very beginning. How did you get into magic?
Well, let's see. I'm 48 years old. I started when I was 6, so it's been pretty much my entire life in magic. But I was given some tricks from my uncle, my great uncle, um, and those were things like the royal magic, the oddball trick with the strings through the red ball,
Mm-hmm.
and the Siberian chain escape, and the color changing knives, and all the classic slum magic tricks. But what he used to do was at all of our family parties, my uncle Nat would give me one of the tricks. He'd teach it to me and say, next time we have a party, if you can come back and show me that trick, I'll show you the next one. So it was
Oh,
kind of like
wow.
he strung me
He started
along.
the chain.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was like a drug dealer, and he gave me those tricks for free, and then it started off the path. So, but even in when I was in elementary school, and I grew up in Westchester County, which is about an hour north of Manhattan, um, I used to come into school dressed up like a magician. Like I was convinced that this was my path. Even at age 7, age 8, I remember going to school, and this is back in the 70s, wearing a 3-piece corduroy suit. And my friends are like, "Why are you wearing that?" Everyone else is wearing like their Incredible Hulk T-shirts,
Yeah.
and I'm wearing like a 3-piece corduroy tan suit. I'm like, "It's because I'm a magician and I have a show," and I didn't have a show, but I just convinced myself that I did.
There's a lot to unpack there. The first thing is I really love here's a trick and do it next time and I'll give you the next one. It's kind of, it's an approach that I would maybe advise to people. That's the first time I've ever heard that. But that sounds awesome. And what a great way to welcome someone into magic and sort of put the rehearsal and practice and performance on more of a pedestal than secrets, right? And as well that you embodied a magician so quickly. So why do you think that you took the identity of a magician?
Oh, I don't know. It was just, at the time, Doug Henning was popular on TV.
Right.
And so I remember watching his shows at, Christmas time or whenever they used to air
Hmm.
those. And I thought, that's for me. That's just, there's something that spoke to me, into my little boy's heart, and said, I want to be able to give people that feeling. I want to be able to make that happen. So it was really, I wouldn't say I was trying to emulate Doug Henning in any way, but he gave me the feeling of magic in my heart, and it just kind of inspired me to want to do that.
It's cool to see how often Doug Henning comes up as the inspiration for so many magicians and all the incredible stuff that they're doing today. Let's keep going. So you were a magician, or you identified as a magician, you dressed like one for sure. And then what happened then that you decided? I mean, you said it was already ingrained in you, but what happened that you decided that you were like, this is what I'm going to do? This is my profession. Did
Right.
you jump in and out of that, or you knew from when you arrived in middle school with a three-piece suit?
Right. Well, do you remember there was a great book by Hyla Clark? It's I think it's called The World's Greatest Magic, and that book was it really opened up my eyes to what the world of magicians was. Are you familiar with this book?
Yes,
It's a
I
big
definitely
black
know the name of the book.
hardcover, and it
Oh, yes,
has
yes.
tons of photographs of popular magicians of the day, including Doug Henning and David Copperfield as a young man when he was just getting started, Siegfried and Roy, and then they had close-up magicians in there. They showed Derek Dingle, and they showed Vernon, and they showed Slidini, and Richard Ross, and all these great magicians of the day back in the 70s. and seeing pictures of them and being able to read stories of their acts, that opened up my eyes to the fact that there was more to this world of magic than just what I had seen from my uncle and from Doug Henning specials. So I was infatuated by that book. I still have my original copy of it, and in fact, there's a whole section in there on Max Malini, which is now my new infatuation. But that book really kind of made me feel like maybe there's more to this, that I can dig deeper. It was almost like a mystery story. I wanted to see where I can take this. And so, I did magic shows all through middle school and high school, but I would say partially that's thanks to having been affiliated with Tannen's Magic Camp.
Hmm.
So, my parents used to take me from our house up in Westchester down to Tannen's Magic Shop,
Hmm.
which at the time was on 1540 Broadway. Um, that address is just ingrained in my brain. And so we used to go down there maybe like once a year or so. It was around Hanukkah time, so my parents would get me a gift for Hanukkah from Tannen's Magic Shop. And then at one point they had mentioned that we have a camp, and I went to that summer camp probably I think maybe 4 or 5 times when I was in my teens, and that gave me the idea that there's much more deeper levels of study that I need to take this to. And that's how I was able to learn magic to be able to do in shows. And I was doing, library shows and birthday parties and Cub Scout blue and gold dinners and whatnot, all through middle school and high school. My parents used to drive me around because I couldn't drive yet. I was still too young, to the parties that I would get booked at. And my very first party, I got paid $10, which, if you think about it, I take it back. It was $25 at my first party, and big difference, especially in the '70s. And yeah, that I promptly put that money back into the business, if you want to call it that, at the
Hmm.
time, buying more tricks from Tannins, like going out in there and buying 20th century silks or something with the money I had just earned.
So you sort of learned that it was possible. You got the business mind that as soon as you got your $25 payment, it went back into the business. Let's talk a little bit about what steps you took to start actually making it a career. Was it just sort of, word of mouth, let it keep growing until you realized it was possible? Did you put it down for a little bit and then come back to it?
That's that's it's decades of conversation, but
Of course.
yeah, but I mean, I went after graduating from high school. I went to Cornell University, excuse me, and so I was at Cornell and I was doing shows for the board of trustees. I did a show for Carl Sagan when he was a professor there.
Wow.
I got invited to do lots of performances, and at one point, I thought to myself, why shouldn't I put on my own show, like an actual show? So I took it upon myself to go to the theater director, and I said, would it be possible to rent out the Black Box Theater? And he said, sure, we'll give you a special student rate. So I rented out the Black Box Theater, and I didn't even have a show, to be honest, like an actual show for adults. I had my birthday party show. But I put ads into the college paper, and then I remember going around campus with some buddies of mine and putting up little flyers on the college residence halls, and we charged, I think, something like $2 for students, $5 for professors, and then the joke was $25 for the college president.
Oh, very funny.
Yeah, yeah, and anyway, he never showed up. But but anyway, so I did 2 or 3 shows like that in a weekend, and they all sold out. And that was my first taste into becoming an entrepreneur and having to have a balance sheet and say, okay, if I put
Mhm.
this much money into the advertising and this much money into the rental, how much money am I actually going to walk away with at the end of the day? If is this
Mhm.
worthwhile doing as a business? And something about that kind of inspired me to say, yes, it is worthwhile, because then I had the wherewithal to put together a show, and it gave me a target. So I said, okay, well, I've already sold these tickets. I was really doing this by the seat of my pants. So
Mhm.
I already had some magic that I had been able to perform well. But when you have a target date and you have an actual show, and people are going to be there, it inspires you. It puts a fire underneath you to put it together much more quickly. Um, so those shows went well. I did it during my sophomore year and again during my senior year. I did 2 of those runs, renting out the theater And again, just doing this all on my own. Like I had enlisted a bunch of friends of mine to help take tickets and all that, but overall, it was really just a solo venture. And little did I know that much later in my life, that was going to be the pattern that I
Hmm.
reintroduced to make my current show, which is really started off as a one-man operation.
I really like that it's not just the magic spirit that's moving the whole thing along, but the entrepreneurial spirit as well. And I think that that's something that is important, not to say that anybody who's a magician needs both, needs whatever, but there's two sides to show business, the show and the business.
Well,
And
yeah.
if you want to do them both, then you need to put in work in both of them. If you want to do one of them, you can very easily find someone to do the second half for you if you want, right? But the really important thing that I want to hopefully pass on the message there to is that you just bit the bullet on the you're like, let's just try it. Let's
Well,
see
here's the
if
thing,
like
though. I mean, the thing about I don't mean to cut you off, but when you're a teenager, I was probably 19, maybe just turning 20 years old. You're ready to try anything, right? And
mhm,
I was just swinging blindly. I wasn't trying to create something that I knew was going to last long or that had a future ripple effect ramifications. It was really just, I wasn't afraid to swing and miss, and that was what helped me to just take these extra risks. Does that make
but I think
sense?
that's good, right?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. And like the problem I think is I have a lot of people who come in, magicians who see what I'm doing now with my chamber magic show, and they say, okay, well, there's this structure that he's created. I'm going to replicate that structure and try to replicate a successful business. And I think
Mhm,
that's the problem is, if you're trying to take something which is already a form and say, I'm going to model myself after that form, like you're missing out on all the life experience of failing. And I
for
think that the
sure.
failure is actually that swinging blindly and not knowing if where what's gonna hit and what's not gonna hit. Um, I think that's actually a necessary part of the process.
And also the joy is found in finding the thing that not just works with you but excites you. Like there's a world where you did that show in college and it was no fun and you didn't like it and you said, screw it, I just want to do this part of it. Obviously that didn't happen, but for someone else, that the best idea isn't to take one exactly and try to fit your own puzzle pieces in, but exactly you're saying, going through the journey, because you might find a different jumping off point, right? Someone else might
Mhm,
say,
right,
you know what? It's better for me to just hire someone to book me out in doing private shows. So you might find a different
right.
jumping off point.
Right, well, I mean, it's the thing for me, and this is digressing a little bit from like the chronological, story of how I became what I'm doing. But the thing is, I just love magic. So
Hmm.
a lot of what people ask me about is, especially magicians are curious about the business end of how I was able to create a
Hmm.
business about around magic and make it into a, very successful operation. But, I don't consider myself a businessman. I don't consider myself, a marketer. I just love magic. I dream about magic. I think about magic all the time. My heroes aren't you know
Hmm.
politicians or scientists or athletes. My heroes are magicians.
Hmm.
I love Mellini, I love Hofstadter and Robert
Hmm.
Houdin, all these historical magicians, Al Goshman, and people I saw when I was growing up. And so, in order for me to make a living doing what I loved, I had to learn how to become a businessman. But that was purely just a means to an end, not because I love business or because I love being an entrepreneur. It's just that I could be doing magic every single day of my life.
It's the thing that you have to learn in order to do the thing that you want to do. So you did some shows, you sort of built the template. Was there any moment where this wasn't the journey? Maybe was there a troubled point, or was there any points where you said, "Oh, like what am I doing here?"
Sure. Yeah.
Or
I
if
mean, well, I mean, the fact is, after I graduated from college, I went to Japan, and I lived in Japan for numerous years. I think it's probably about 3 or 4 years at that point. And during that time, I wasn't performing magic professionally. I did a part-time work here and there. I did have a regular gig doing close-up magic at the Park Hyatt Tokyo, which is the hotel notorious for its appearance in the Bill Murray movie Lost in
Mhm,
Translation.
mhm.
So that was my hotel. I worked there for 2 years, doing close up magic every Sunday, and that kind of also gave me an idea about working at a hotel or doing magic at a hotel. That was kind of put the idea in my head that maybe this is a venue for magic. Um, so anyway, so after I left Japan, moved back to America, I wasn't working as a professional magician at all. It was purely, I was just, magic was a hobby. I wanted to do magic, but I was trying to make a living, and a meager one at that. So um, I got a job at a fashion design company doing marketing, because they had some dealings with the Japanese counterparts. So they needed someone who could speak Japanese and who could help with their marketing. So I did help in that area, working um, in a non-magic capacity. But in the back of my head, I thought, this is not for me. Working for someone else, doing this slugging out work, it's just not what I want to be doing in my life. So then I left that company, and for a little while I was doing translation work, Japanese translation work, um, which was basically translating documents from Japanese into English that had nothing to do with magic again. It was purely just, to be able to make a living and trying to live in Manhattan. These were things like Japanese patents and legal contracts and
Mhm.
documents.
Not the
So
most exciting things to be
no, it wasn't.
translating.
And so I remember spending days and days in Manhattan in my apartment, my small apartment, and I would be morning till night in an apartment just typing out English from reading the Japanese document. And it would be nighttime, and I'd look out the window and suddenly the day is already dark. Um, and I thought, this is not for me either. So I remember
Mhm.
at one point I thought to myself, I need to be out there putting on some sort of a show so that people know I exist. I had been getting a few bookings here and there for private gigs, and those were kind of augmenting my translator salary, my income, because the translation business is actually pretty lucrative if you do it right, if you do it often enough. So I would do shows here and there, but I realized that bookers would say, "How do we know you're good?"
Right.
And I said, "Well, you have to hire me to find out."
Yeah.
And that's a double-edged sword. Like, how do
Right.
people know that you're worth however much the asking price is if they don't know how good you are? And I didn't have. I was in my
Mhm.
early 20s, mid 20s. I didn't really have any place for people to see me. So then I realized I really had to get a showcase together. And that was what inspired me to really start with the whole concept of what is now my show, Chamber Magic, is I wanted to have a showcase so that people could potentially come and see me and then say, boy, this guy is great. We really ought to hire him for our corporate event or for our private party. And um, over the course of time, and I'm skipping a lot of decades here. Over the course of time, the business has changed from me trying to get gigs to that showcase is now my entire livelihood.
Mhm.
So I don't really do very many gigs at all now. But the show itself has a life of its own. And that's how I'm making my full living.
Again, instead of choosing to fit into someone else's thing, you just choose to start your own show. And the reason I bring that up is when you were painting a picture and saying, "Ah, there's nowhere for people to see me," in my head, I was thinking, near New York, go be on some comedy clubs, right? Go be on a lineup of a
I
comedy
thought about
club.
that. I thought about that. Yeah. In fact, I remember talking to my friend Steve Chiffo. I don't know if you ever came across him. He's a really, really great magician, great actor. So, anyway, so I asked Steve because he had connections in like the downtown, like Lower East Side performance art spaces. And I said, Steve, like, can you recommend any places where I might be able to get my face out there, get my name known? And he recommended some really kind of like dive places in the Lower East Side, like
Mhm.
these little garages and cellar type of clubs. And I thought, that's not for me, because I
Mhm.
just knew in my heart what I was like. I knew what I stood for.
Mhm.
And I'd always looked at. Remember when I was in second grade or third grade in elementary school, I was wearing a three-piece suit to school, right?
Right.
I just knew that I was trying to capture this elegance of magic, or this to elevate magic, to make it so that it was something on a pedestal, as
Mhm.
opposed to just like another act on a comedy club stage. And so
Mhm.
when Steve Chiffo told me about those places, I passed on them. I said, well, those sound good, but they're not really for me. And that's why I kept on looking. And in fact, at one point, and this is kind of coming a little bit more to the present day, I thought, which magician am I most like? Which magician from the annals of history would I most associate with? And at the time, I came across Hofzinser, and
Mhm.
Johann Hofzinser had been putting on these salon shows in Vienna in the 19th century. And I looked at the clothing that the guests were wearing, and I looked at the clothing that he was wearing in these woodcut illustrations, and they're very elegant, and the people are dressed in such a genteel way. And back in the day, these salons were kind of the place where people would gather to talk about news of the day and politics and philosophy. And I thought, that's really who I am. Here I'm an Ivy League educated person, and I'd like to be able to bring my magic to that place as opposed to bring my magic to, like, some place that already exists. So I thought, I have to create a salon. This is going to be the best thing ever. There's probably tons of places in New York where you can create a salon. And that was the beginning of my search. So I cut out a picture from a Sphinx magazine of Hofzinser's salon, and I showed that picture to everyone I ever met. So I showed it to my dry cleaner, I showed it to my doorman, I showed it to people, friends of friends, parents of kids at my kids' schools. And so I would say, do you ever see a place that looks like this? And along the way, someone said, oh, you should check the National Arts Club. So I went to the National Arts Club, which is in Gramercy Park, and it's this beautiful Victorian style mansion that is filled with fine art from its members, because everyone who's a member there is an artist.
Mhm.
And they've got, it almost looks like a Titanic era, drawing room when you walk in, or ballroom. And I thought, this is the place for
Mhm.
me. So actually, after having done a couple of test shows at my friend's apartment, I moved the show into this club, and I did the show there for several months. This is nearly 20 years ago now. And it was great. The audience was all dressed up. I was in this beautiful environment with Tiffany glass ceilings and fireplace behind me. And it just looked like the right venue. It was Hofzinser's salon.
Mhm.
And the only problem was, after doing the show, and I could tell you how I got people to come in, is because that club had a membership that was eager to attend events at that club. So they would get postcards before the internet even really kind of took off. They would get postcards every quarter of all the upcoming events that were being held there. And so they just slipped my postcard into that packet, and members would subscribe to different events. And one of the events that they called in to buy tickets for was chamber magic. So
Wow.
that was how I was able to fill up all those seats for the first 3 months. But the problem was, after having done the show there for that 3 month period, is that the club closes, like many private clubs in Manhattan. It closes for the summer because all the
Mhm.
members go to the Hamptons, and
Mhm.
the club then does maintenance work and whatnot over the summertime, and they just don't open it at all to anybody for any price. So I found that the show was just shut down after the 3 month momentum. I had some success with it, and people were coming to the show and telling their friends about it, and there was media coverage on CBS News and whatnot. And suddenly the whole thing had just ground to a stop.
I'm sure that's a little lesson in, or rather, another lesson in being able to have your own venue and invite your own people, or find a way to get your own people to attend the show. And that's one of the, one of the things that I've learned in producing shows, is that obviously it's more challenging to have your own venue and more challenging to bring your own people, but then it's yours and your resource, and someone can't say, nope, we're closed for 6 months.
It grinds to a halt. It just grinds to a halt. And so at the very last show, I mentioned to some people in the audience, I said, well, this is it. This is my last show. If any of you happen to know a place where I can move this to, this is during the show. I actually said this during the performance. Like, if any of you happen to know a place I can move this
You
to,
pull up
please.
that photo of Hobson's.
Yeah, well, I said, this is what I'm looking for, and I kind of like draped my hands around the room,
Yeah.
and so this is what I'm looking for. Anyone know any place like this?
That's funny.
And so this one lady came up to me afterwards, and she eventually later became my manager, and she said, "Well, the fact is, I actually know people who work at the Waldorf Astoria, because I've worked with them for a long time on this charity event that I do." And I said, "Really? Well, I mean, the Waldorf Astoria, that place seems like it's a legend. Like, it's out of my
Mhm.
reach." She said, "No, no, no. I know the people there. Let me introduce you to them." So I came and I did a sample show for them. They loved it. But what I found out behind the scenes is that they said to my friend, "Look, we don't do magic. This is the Waldorf." And she said, "No, trust me. This guy is great. I've seen his whole show. He's drawing crowds. Like, it'll be good for just give him a chance." And so the hotel said, "Okay, we'll give him a chance." And so I come in September of that year, and that was in 2001 or 2000. I forget now. Anyway, it's I think it was 2000, and I was there. I stayed there for 16 and a half years,
Wow.
doing 5 shows a weekend.
That's incredible. And I love that moment when they said, magic here at the Waldorf. Are you sure?
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's another testament to how much it's our jobs to paint magic in the way that we think that it should be painted. And you've said it before when we were talking about potentially being featured in comedy clubs. It's like, that's just not the way that I want my magic to be showcased. That's not the way that I want to showcase magic. And then you have an opportunity to do the exact opposite, which is someone saying like you get to be at the Waldorf, and then the people at the Waldorf being like, I don't know if magic is good enough for this,
Yeah,
right?
and then the beautiful part of it then, Jonah, is that I then kind of grew into the space. Like I created
Right.
this show that meshed with the environment. So like I started changing my clothes to match the decor of the room so that it was pleasing on the eye. And the props that I had built were built with that room in mind. And they were the right color and the right shape and the right materials. Um, I would have I became so comfortable in that space, like I wouldn't have to when I reached down for something, I wouldn't have to look to it because I knew it'd always be where it
Right.
was the last time I placed it there. And that's the beauty of having your own venue as opposed to being on a stage that's someone else's stage that you're kind of just borrowing or just kind of
Mhm.
appearing at. Is that everything is where it needs to be and everything has its place. So it's very comforting. Like you have the freedom to not be worrying about your props. You have the freedom to be able to focus on the audience. And as you know, because you're a performer yourself, that's what it's really all about, is to be able to turn it back outwards towards the audience. It's not about look how wonderful I am, but look how wonderful we are, or how wonderful this experience is. And so then, I had this great conversation with Jeff McBride because he came to the show, and I feel really flattered because, like all of my heroes who are alive have come to see Chamber of Magic, and it's so flattering to look out in the audience and see someone like Jeff
Mhm.
McBride or David Copperfield or all these, like, Tom Maurice coming to the show, and
Mhm.
Eugene Berger, rest in peace, came to see the show, and all these great magicians, have given me tips and advice and pointers over the years. And one of the things that Jeff McBride said when he came, and he made a really great point about this, is when he came to the Waldorf, he said, you're inviting people through many frames, like picture frames. So when they come to the hotel, they're waiting in this gorgeous gilded lobby, and that's the first frame. Then they're going up into an elevator that is usually used by the Secret Service because that's where the president stays. So they're going. That's the second frame. Then they're walking down this beautiful hallway with all these elegant, hand painted,
Mhm.
artwork on the walls. That's the next frame. And then they walk into this room and this beautiful drawing room. That's another frame. And then they sit down at their chairs and they see on their chairs they see this hand painted program, with all the names of famous people who have been to the show before. That's another frame. And then finally, when you walk out, like they're already so stoked, they're so excited to
Mhm.
see you because they've already painted a picture in their head of what experience is going to be like. And then in addition to that, there's a frame that surrounds it all, or surrounds all the other frames, like kind of an overarching frame, and that's that. We invite people to dress up with cocktail attire. So like
Mhm.
these people are planning in advance, like even before they get there, maybe even weeks in advance, they might be planning, what am I going to wear to the magic show? And during the show, I actually thank people for following the dress code and getting dressed up. And you always see the girlfriends nudging their boyfriends with their
Mhm.
elbows, saying, see, I told you. Because a lot of
Mhm.
people, they don't want to get dressed up. Like they think, why
Right.
do I have to get dressed up for a magic show? This is not a state dinner with the president. This is
Mhm.
it's a show. But I think that there's, like I said, there's something beautiful about giving like theater with a capital T the respect that it deserves, which is, it's a night out. It's not like, people go to the theater now and they're wearing flip flops and shorts. And I think
Mhm.
that's a disrespect, not to the actors and not to the directors and not to the theater owners, but to the genre and the beauty of the experience of theater. If you look at pictures or old timey videos of people going out in the 1920s, you see all the men wearing their top hats and the ladies wearing these
Mhm.
big puffy dresses. That used to be the norm for going out to a special affair, a special event. And I think we've kind of degraded that, and I love to try to bring that back. I do it the best I can by having a dress code.
One of the things that really caught my attention there, when talking about the different frames that people are going through, is the consistency. And that's to say that you can do all that you can to dress yourself up and make your show seem a certain way. It does all have to sort of fit together. You can't have a ridiculous show in the most elegant space. You can't have a really elegant show in a dive comedy bar. So it's just interesting how much the environment plays such a big role
For
in
sure.
not only what you're presenting, but more importantly, how it's being interpreted.
Yes, Michael Close has a great essay in one of his Workers books. Are you familiar with the
Mhm.
Workers
Of
series?
course.
Yeah, and so he has one essay in there called Venue, and I recommend that all the listeners go back and
Mhm.
reread that if you haven't already read it, because he talks about this precise thing about how venue actually helps to, or the venue helps to define the experience. Because
Mhm.
people often say to me, "Oh, how did you end up at how did you end up doing magic at the Waldorf Astoria?" And I say, I always make a joke. Well, the Holiday Inn was booked.
Right.
And but the fact is, like, if you had come to the Holiday Inn, you would have had a different
Of
experience.
course.
And in fact, when I was living in Tokyo, I mentioned I was at the Park Hyatt Hotel doing the shows there. That wasn't my only gig. I also had another walk around gig, which was at a beer hall in the Ginza part of Tokyo. And I was doing precisely the same material. I was doing the same card tricks, the same, color changing knives, whatever my act was at the
Mhm.
time. And the reaction at the beer hall versus the reaction at the refined, beautiful, elegant hotel were entirely different. People gave me the time of day at the hotel, but they thought I was just some cheap kind of hooligan walking
Mhm.
around at the beer hall. And again, it's the same material, but the venue was defined, helped to define the experience.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of elegance and properness that is so apparent in everything that you do. We sort of touched on it in talking about how the Waldorf was perfect and how comedy clubs were not so good, the dive comedy clubs. Can you talk a little bit about this elegance and maybe why you feel that it's so important, or if not important, why you're doing it to showcase yourself?
Okay, so like I said, you have to kind of know who you are and where you come from and what you are most, what you're able to bring to an experience. And I grew up in Chappaqua, New York, which is about an hour north of Manhattan, like I mentioned, in Westchester County. So all of my friends and all the homes that I was, going to perform in when I was doing these birthday parties were all, $2-3 million homes.
Right.
And so, I learned that in order to be able to make these people think I was worthy of the asking fee for these birthday party performances, I had to be good. It was kind of like very Darwinian,
Mhm.
and I became very comfortable performing in front of wealthy audiences, partially because that's kind of the crowd that I ran with.
Mhm.
And so, if you put me into an environment that I didn't look right in, then probably I wouldn't have done as well. But it was just the crowd that I happened to be running with. I used to put up little flyers in the town that had those little cut off tags, like call me at my telephone number. But the people who were taking those little tags, the rip off from the bottom of the page, those were like people's chauffeurs and their nannies. Like it was from wealthy
Right.
families. So like, I always knew that that was a venue and it's where I kind of excelled or I shined. So it wasn't like by design, like I thought I have to do magic for rich
Mhm.
people, but I ended up doing magic very well for rich people. And I remember even when I was around 17 or 18 years old, I got invited to perform for David Rockefeller in his palatial estate.
Wow.
And, this is my first dipping of the toe into performing for a billionaire, and ended up performing for, I think, something like 40 or 50 billionaires since then. And it's just something like when you are exposed to this, you start to think, well, I think I want to do this more because it feels good, it feels right. um, so that's kind of how I ended up moving in that direction.
There's one aspect of it that's sort of designing the way that you want to be showcased, but a big aspect seems that it's revealing, right? Like discovering who you are or who you were, your upbringing, where you're most comfortable, where you're most natural. And I always laugh because every magician wants to be a corporate magician, which is that doesn't make sense to me because I know why they're doing it because they think that it's thick pockets.
Right, right.
And I just want to, use this as an opportunity to say that there's different areas of magic, different types of performance, and you shouldn't pick one because those people have the thickest pockets. You can do twice as many shows for another group, or you can find a way to make the crowd bigger. So I just wanted
Well, I was just saying, if you sorry, if you ask me who my target audience is, my target audience is The Great Gatsby.
Right.
And my target audience is the filthy rich. That was what my best friend
I love that.
Mark Levy came up to me and he said, "Look, I've been watching what you're doing. This is before we really kind of launched Chamber Magic. He goes, I've been looking at what you're doing. He says you're very comfortable performing for rich people. You should become the Millionaires Magician." And I was like, okay, that's a phrase that had been written about me in a magazine.
Hmm.
He goes, you should use that as your moniker. You call yourself
Hmm.
the Millionaires Magician, and then your tag phrase could be magic for the filthy rich. And I said, well, hold on a second. That's going to turn off a lot of people. That's like obscene. And he said, it's obscene, but if that's your mental audience, if you know that's who you're targeting, then
Hmm.
actually you're really becoming a better marketer because now you know who your
Hmm.
target audience is. And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to call them the filthy rich because nobody likes to be called that. But he said, okay, well, what if you call it magic for exclusive events? I said, okay, that's a little bit better. So my business cards I printed up at the time said Steve Cohen, the Millionaires Magician, magic for exclusive events. And what Mark said to me, and he's a pretty brilliant guy. He said, if you can't turn down the $2,000 show, you'll never get the $20,000 show.
Right.
And I said, wow, well, that's mind blowing. And the problem is that you know, we're very emotionally connected to our pricing.
Hmm.
And even with ticket prices, I know you run shows in
Hmm.
Connecticut, in Canada, you
Toronto.
told me,
Yeah.
and you're probably emotionally attached to how much each person is paying. But if you're a
Right.
businessman, you're not emotionally attached. You're looking at it from like a structural standpoint or from like a system standpoint. Like how much is the market willing to bear? And it's not
Hmm.
really like how much do I think I'm worth? Like, do I have a self-esteem issue? It's really just a matter now of what is this worth in the world of entertainment in this region in this time frame. And so if you look at what Disney does, like Disney, they have dynamic pricing where they'll change their prices over and over again throughout the year, and that's based on trends and themes and
Testing.
seasons. And they'll say, okay, for example, Brazil has a holiday during this week out of the year, and many Brazilians will be coming to New York to watch a Disney show on Broadway during this 1 week. So they'll start advertising to the Brazilian audience 3 weeks prior to that or 3 months prior to that in
Right.
anticipation, and then pricing will be adjusted accordingly for that specific target. And that only really works when you have big data. And
Hmm.
for me, I've been doing this show, Chamber Magic, now for I'm going on my 20th year. So um, I kind of have big data and I'm able to look and see what the trends are. I'm not emotionally attached to my pricing anymore. So I can change the pricing, make it higher, make it lower. I can increase the ticket prices. At one point, the tickets to my show were running at $750 a ticket. That was near the end of my show at the Waldorf before it was closing. And I had to move to a new venue. But, that was totally not emotional. It was purely just
Hmm.
business. And I think that it's interesting as a business person to be able to distance yourself from the emotional value of each ticket.
There's a funny conversation that I have with my partner in the Toronto Magic Company, and we're always talking about it. And what came up recently is we were talking about launching a new show, and I mentioned a price. Let's say I was like $60 for a ticket, and then he referenced one of our shows that has $20 a ticket, and he said, "Is this show 3 times better than that show?" And I said, "Well, that's not necessarily how it works, right? So I'm thinking of myself as the businessman, right? And he's the more emotionally attached to the money. But yeah, there's so many different ways to think about pricing, and also like you just said, the way that like when you are talking about your pricing, it feels like you're showcasing a part of yourself. When someone asks how much you cost, if you say, not only how much you say, but how you say it and how you're confident. If you're like, I cost 10,000, so everything about your pricing, and the way that you share it, showcases a little bit about yourself. And yeah, it's a challenge to become more emotionally separated between those two things. And
Right.
it's a muscle that you have to get used to using. And every time I increase my price, it's a new muscle.
For sure.
I know you just mentioned it briefly about how it started with the tagline, "Millionaire Magician." Can you talk a little bit about how it sort of helped?
Yes, I could talk to that. So basically, when I started, I mentioned to my wife, I mentioned to my parents, I said I'm going to call myself the Millionaires Magician, and everyone said, "Don't do it. He said, that's just foolish. You're going to be putting yourself into an uncomfortable position. You're going to turn people off and turn people away. And my best friend, Mark Levy, he said, don't listen to them. Listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. And I
Sorry,
had been
just
called.
to interject,
Yes.
when you decided to call yourself the Millionaires Magician, were you
Yes.
already performing for millionaires and millionaires, or were you
Oh, yeah,
doing that
sure.
in hopes to
Oh, yeah, I already was. I mean, I had already
Okay, cool.
performed at that point for Andy Grove of Intel, and I'd already
Right.
performed for Michael Bloomberg multiple
I just
times. And
I just wanted to
yeah,
mention
so
that before you went in because I know a lot of people think about, that their branding is going to, help them to, if they call themselves
like
a
a
corporate
self-fulfilling
magician, but
prophecy.
right, exactly. So just wanted to bring that up so that people don't sort of feel that you're like, now I'm the millionaire magician. Goodbye, old clients. Let's go for new client.
Right. Well, I mean, again, you have to remember that, um, I thought it was the wrong idea. I thought like you did that it was probably a mistake.
Right.
And then Mark Levy said to me, just do it and see what happens. And what I found was happening is that, as I was also putting on these public shows, is that I was now the high fruit on the tree.
Hmm.
And people had to reach for me because the ticket prices were higher, the experience was unique, being performed in the Waldorf Astoria, and it just felt like something that people wanted to be a part of. It was like a lifestyle choice. So when I went to London, I did the show in London in 2003, and the media there ate it up. There was a New Yorker calling himself the Millionaires Magician. What's that all about? And I had tons
Right.
of coverage, and I was on BBC radio and television and all these popular talk shows and the Evening Standard and London Times and all these great publications. And then when they wrote articles about me as the Millionaires Magician. When I came back to New York, the press tends to read itself. So I was now kind of like Houdini returning as Europe's eclipsing
Right.
sensation.
Right.
I was now the Millionaires Magician as having been evidenced in London
Right.
as being a success. So I had all this great press, and that started to feed into itself in New York. Started getting covered by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Associated Press, and they were all calling me the Millionaire's Magician because that was now the accepted term. And you know, although I had originally thought it was the wrong term, I was proven wrong, and it clearly made sense. Now, will I ever give that up? I don't really emphasize it now. I mean, it's
Hmm.
used in my marketing, but I don't turn people away. We don't. When people come into the show, I don't make them give a bank statement to show me what their net worth is. And in fact, if people ever do ask, they say, "Well, why do you call yourself the Millionaire's Magician?" I say it's because, well, when you leave the show, you feel like $1 million.
Oh, great.
And so that's like my little cute little way of kind of,
Yeah.
covering my bases if the people who come are not wealthy. It's not so elitist that you can't show up here if you didn't save your
Hmm.
save your pennies and come to the show. The fact is, I'm not elitist in any way. I don't feel like I'm elitist. I feel like I'm giving people this great experience of what it would be like to be in a 19th century drawing room back
Hmm.
in the day when this was the accepted way for wealthy patrons to
The
invite their
elite.
guests and entertain their family and their friends.
Part of this whole performing thing is about giving this an entire experience, right? And that comes down to everything, like we've spoken of so far. It comes to venue, that comes down to attire, comes down to the manner in which you speak, the way you present yourself, and it also comes down to the branding in which you give yourself, not just for the sake of it being, self-selective of the people that you work with, but also how people feel when they see you perform, choose to hire you, are thankful that they hired you. Everything in
Right.
between is all part of the experience that people are getting.
But yeah,
Uh,
but I have to also kind of follow up by saying that the show itself has to be solid. Um,
yes, and the show.
I mean, we keep on talking about all the business and the marketing and all that, but when it comes to the end of the day, people are only going to be talking about the experience of the show, right? So,
Mhm.
I don't have a marketing budget. I don't really have an advertising budget, but the shows now I did my 5,000th show last October. Um, the show's been running sold out for nearly 2 decades, and it's because I think that the show is good, and the show
Mhm.
has evolved and it's gotten better. And I think that by doing the show so many times, you can start to focus on different elements of it at each show. So for example, I might spend at one show all my effort to improve my posture, to
Right.
stand more tall with my shoulders back. And then the next show
Mhm.
I'll focus more on my enunciation, to
Mhm.
make sure that all the words are coming out clearly. Or one show I might focus more on my blocking. And then, of course, by focusing a whole hour and a half on just that one area, then you have that now in your toolbox, your tool belt. So when you do the
Mhm.
next show, that's already taken care of. Like you now have that as it's become part of you. By doing the show so many times, like it basically gives you the gift of being able to play and be flexible with trying to learn how to mold it. And my goal at the end of the show is, I want people's brains to be melted, right? I want them
Right.
to feel like they had the back of their heads blown off, but at the same time, I want them to feel like it was a fun experience. I want them to tell their friends and family about it, and I'm not shy about that. At the very near the end of the show, right before the final trick, I tell people, I say, look, at the end of the show, please feel free to take one of my business cards. You'll see them in the back of the room. Also, you'll see a guest book there where you can sign in, leave us your email address. I'd love to send you some updates about the show and upcoming TV appearances. And people are all nodding their heads. Like when I'm mentioning this, they're like, oh yeah, and they're nudging their date. They're like, yeah, we should tell so and so about this. And like when you see that's happening, you're doing something right. Because like I said, you might want to tell your friends about this, and they go, yeah, definitely, we'll definitely tell people about this. The audience becomes my advocates, and that's
Mhm.
really what you're trying to do, is build this army of people who will kind of do your marketing for you, because I don't really have a budget for that.
I do want to thank you for highlighting, the importance of not only the quality of the show, which is the most important, but also the reiteration and the doing of the show hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times and what that allows in terms of the quality. It's such an important thing to highlight, which is the thing that makes people talk about the show and tell their friend to come to it and whatever. It's not this like, this key secret, buy one, get one free. It's not this like interesting marketing hack that nobody thought of. It's having an incredible show and encouraging people to talk about it and
Yeah.
share it. So,
Well, I've got
uh,
I do have one more thing to speak to in that area,
please.
which is that if you're doing the same material that everyone else is doing, then you're becoming an interchangeable magician.
Hmm.
And I remember at one of my shows, there was a lady from Ferragamo, the shoe company, the Italian shoe company. She
Hmm.
came to the show to scout me for a corporate event that she was thinking of doing downtown in Manhattan. And at the time, I was still kind of early in my career. I was doing a lot of material that other people were doing. It was, there were common tricks. And after the show was over, she came up to me. She says, "Oh, that was good, but I've seen this before. I've seen that before. I can get someone else for less to do the same type of show." And I thought to myself, I said, "Well, you can get someone else for less. What do you mean by that?" And basically, when I confronted her, she said, "Well, you're doing material. You're doing magic. I've seen other people do. So now it's just a matter of price." And then I looked at her,
Hmm.
I said, "Well, hold on a second. You're selling Italian leather shoes at a premium. Those are expensive shoes, like, a couple of $1,000s for a pair of shoes. I could buy Stride Right shoes. I could buy Hush Puppies. I could buy,
Hmm.
from Price Wise Shoes Shop, some shoes that will make my feet comfortable while I'm walking on a road, but they're not going to be the same experience as the shoes that you're selling." She goes, "Point taken," and then she just left. But I think that I kind of made a point to myself at that moment, which was that, if I'm doing the same material as everyone else, then people are just shopping by price. So I have to be doing better
Right.
material or other material. So that's when I started thinking, what can I be doing that other people are not doing? And I remember Josh Jay had some study that he was involved in a university. It was in Pennsylvania or something like that. I forget which school it was at, but he did a scientific study, asking laymen, what is it that you want to see at a magic show? What are you most
Hmm.
expecting? And they're expecting to be surprised. They're expecting to see things they had never seen before. And I think that's partially what we're trying to do, right, with our shows, is give people an experience that's not a repeat of something they've already seen, maybe better, but just something entirely different. So, I'm always scouring old magic books and old magazines, the Sphinx, the Magic Wand. I'm constantly rereading these old journals to try to find tricks that haven't been seen for a long time. And I used to spend time at Bill Kalush's library here in New York, the Conjuring
Hmm.
Arts Research Center, and still go online and use Ask Alexander regularly, at least once or twice a
Hmm.
week, to try to find tricks that are just what we would consider to be old, but for the rest of the world would be considered to be new.
So many of us right now find ourselves in performing situations where there are so many other magicians. The more now that you can distinguish yourself, the better. And again, we're not only talking about distinguishing ourselves that we share a lineup with, but it often means distinguishing ourselves from people that are on TV. Like as soon as someone's solving and matching Rubik's cubes on America's Got Talent and Penn and Teller and every local morning show, it's tough to do that trick and not feel like you're the second or third or fifth person to do it, even for a lay audience, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
so I fully agree with you, and just to bring it up that, it's not just a local scale. It's not like, oh, I'm the only one in my town doing this. If someone's seen the trick, if it's got 10 million views on just the viral version of the video that crossed your path on Facebook, you can be sure that a lot of people have seen that happen before, and more reason to either search back in books for secrets, or maybe be inventive, or find a way to do old tricks featuring new props or whatever, find a way to
Yes, that's what I do. That's
innovate.
that's my that's my MO, which is basically looking for old tricks that haven't really been seen for quite some time, and then possibly using new methods or new techniques, or techniques that have been created since then,
Right.
to incorporate that. And if it was appealing to someone 100 or 200 years ago, it might still be appealing to them
Mhm.
today because we're still humans, right?
Yeah. I want to change directions a little bit. I very recently read your book Win the Crowd, as well as reading the graphic novel that came out, and we'll talk a little about the graphic novel in a sec, as well as the book, which I
Mm,
really love. And just to give a quick note about Win the Crowd, which I know is like it's like 10 years old now or something. How
around that, yeah, sure. I forget when I
something
put
like
that out.
that. But
Hmm.
it's one of the only books I've ever read by a magician that shares this sort of like what I learn about magic and what you can learn about da 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 da, where that it actually is helpful and it actually all makes sense from both the magic perspective and the normal person learning something perspective. So I really enjoyed reading it.
Well,
But
thank
but
you.
one of the things that I wanted to bring up about it that you see in the book and in the graphic novel and a lot of your work is you talk about maxims of magic, and you talk about there's sort of like rules for people to follow. So
Sure.
my question is, and I'm obviously there's some of these in the book, and my question is, are you getting them from somewhere? Did someone give you maxims? I was never told about maxims until I started reading your book. So maybe talk a little bit about them, where they came from, and what people can do
Sure.
to
Those,
start using them.
but I did come up with those on my own. And when you're trying to create a structure for a book, you're trying to think, well, what can I teach that won't tip too much to non-magicians,
Right.
right? But at the same time is true to what we're actually doing. So when you have people who are reading the book, and I'm giving the book away to magician friends, they don't think, oh, that's just all BS. Like, how dare you,
Right.
try to paint a simplified picture of what we're doing. So, with something like being bold, I think I talked about Max Malini, who's really one of my
Hmm.
heroes in magic. Um, and the funny thing about Malini, by the way, is that I ended up performing in the Waldorf Astoria, which is where Max Malini kind of made his mark when he was living in New York City. I even
Cool.
tried to find his brick, because the brick that he pulled out of the hat for the brick from the hat trick
Hmm.
was on display in the old Waldorf Astoria lobby in a museum case.
Wow.
And they had a little placard next to it that said, "This is the brick that was magically produced from a hat by master magician Max Malini." And I tried to get that brick because I wanted to use that in my own shows, to pull from a hat. But unfortunately, during the construction, that brick had just kind of gotten lost in the wayside. Anyway, so going back to that, so Max Malini is a great example of being bold and taking risks, and I think that you can extrapolate that in your life, and asking uh, permission. How does it go again? I'm drawing a blank on this. Asking permission after the fact. Never
Right.
apologizing.
Yeah.
Just ask. You
Right.
know, Apologize after the fact, and don't ask
Yeah.
permission beforehand. And
Better to ask forgiveness than permission.
exactly. And so, that's really part of what being bold is about, like taking a risk, doing something, and then later on you can either, take credit for it, all the glory for it, or you can, apologize for having stepped over the line too far. So anyway, so rather than going into each of those, I
Hmm.
think that the book itself, though, stands up. And I've had a lot of people who are teachers, I've had a lot of business people, presenters say that the book has helped them a lot. So that I kind of was pleased to hear, and eventually was translated into 7 different languages.
Well, it's a fantastic book, and particularly my favorite section is the one about magic words, talking about different ways to say things and for them to be more effective. And so many of them were things that I used in magic, used because I was taught, but I was never taught in those words or that or with such clarity of like, if you say or, then it'll do this. If you say,
Right,
if you
right.
give 2 instructions, it'll do this,
Sure.
which is great because there were habits that I had, but I didn't know
Yeah,
why.
the double
Um,
instruction is a really good key, a really good technique, because if you're giving 2 instructions, they can't say no to either one of them, right? So stand over here and put this, yeah, stand over here and hold this up. Like they
right.
can't say no because they have to. Either am I saying no to standing over
You're
here,
like,
or
no,
am
I'll
I saying
stand
no
over. Yeah,
to holding
exactly.
it up? It's like, okay, it's easier just to say yes to both of them, right? And in fact,
Hmm.
I have a new one that I didn't even write because at the time it really wasn't appropriate. Um, so if you're ever at a performance and you see someone taking out their phone to do some sort of a I don't know, they're texting or they're looking at social media during your performance, yeah, that
Hmm.
really irks me. I'm sure it does you too.
Hmm.
And so what I've done now is, instead of saying to the person, put that away or stop texting or you can't do that here, because that's very aggressive. It allows them to just negate it with a single glance or verbiage.
Hmm.
What I do is I say, "Excuse me, there's no videotaping of this performance. Would you please put down your camera?" And
Right.
now it's a verbal trick, because now they have to say, "Oh no, I was just checking my Instagram."
It's just worse.
Right? It
Yeah.
makes them look even worse, right? So
Yeah. So instead, they just go, oh, yeah.
they just say,
Hmm.
"Oh, okay, sure," and they put it away right away without even saying a word. So that's
I love that.
another little
That's good.
verbal trick.
It's appealing to nobler motives. I like that. And just on the note about that, it feels like in the maxims when you're talking about it in Win the Crowd, as well as I think it was mentioned, or some of them were mentioned in the graphic novel, which
Mhm.
we'll talk about in a little bit.
Mm.
Are those things that it feels like these are things that you conduct yourself by?
It really is. They are things I conduct myself by. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout. I am an Eagle Scout. So, um, when you have something that in one of the maxims is to always be prepared. I mean, that's something that
Hmm.
I've lived my life
Right.
by, and practice,
Right.
practice, practice. These are things that every magician is taught. It's one of the original, like, 2 or 3 rules of a magician, right? Never tell
Hmm.
people the secret, and practice, practice, practice. These are things that we're taught at an early age. And I don't have it written on my wall, but I think that they're written on my heart, in my heart. And you know it's easy to live by it because it's something that I believe.
Hmm. Do you think that magicians, I know we're talking about like lessons that magicians get early, and some of them are things like, never teach a trick, and and different things like that. And some of them fall at the wayside, and some of them maybe other people don't know, or some magicians know and some don't. Aside from the 5 maxims, be bold, expect success, don't state, suggest, practice, 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 be prepared. Is there any other sort of advice, tagline, thought, motto that magicians either should know and don't, or maybe some know and some don't, or something that you found that all magicians should keep in mind?
Well, I do have something, which is, it's not really just applying to magic, but it's applying to, like, any type of venture that you're going to be involved in.
Hmm.
And I did a show on a cruise ship. It wasn't like a public cruise; it was a private cruise, and people that were on the boat were people like Richard Branson and Elon Musk. I mean, it was like a really unbelievable event that I did. And they had this giant banner that was for all the attendees. Everyone who was there was, like, a successful entrepreneur, and the sign said, "Make no small plans." And that was the kind of the mantra of the entire weekend, that we were all trying to do, is to make no small plans. And that's kind of the advice that I give myself. I try to remind myself. And actually, I tried to find where it came from, and then I was reading the book. Do you know the book called Devil in the White City? Have you come
I do
across it?
not.
Yeah, it's a book by Eric Larson. And anyway, so I found that quote in the book, and I jotted it down here. It says, "Make no little plans; they have no magic to stir men's blood." And that was actually a quote from Daniel Burnham, who was the chief architect of the Chicago World's Fair. So when I read that it had that follow-up line, which says, "Make no little plans. They have no they have no magic to stir men's blood," that really kind of inspired me to kind of take this on and as my own kind of life direction, to make no little plans. Like, why would you want to spend all of your life effort on something that's going to have just a
Small.
little
Yeah.
impact when you can make something that's has great impact for
Mhm.
many people?
And often it takes quite a similar amount of work to plan something mid-size than it does to plan something large, right?
Exactly.
And better to do the large thing.
Brother, I wouldn't say it was large as in creating one large show, but like thinking about like your whole career as one large experiment. So for me,
Mhm.
for example, I thought, how can I expand beyond having a public show? I've got this public show that's been running now for for decades. What can I do next? And then I thought, okay, well, I'll put on a midnight show. And so I thought, okay, I still have this room, so I put on a show which is called Miracles at Midnight, and I kept that running then for. It was running once a month. The tickets were $250 per person, limited to 20 people per show. The people who were coming to that show were Saudi princes, Russian oligarchs, and they're people who didn't want to be with the rest of the public.
Mhm.
They wanted to kind of just be on their own. So it was open to the public, but people who could afford that ticket price were kind of self-selecting. So then I did that, and then from there I thought, okay, what else can I do to make a bigger plan? I thought, okay, how about Carnegie Hall? And so I booked Carnegie Hall, and I put on my show at Carnegie Hall in on a Thursday night, and sold out the show in about 2 hours. So like for me, that was like creating like a bigger thing. Like, what can I do next? Okay, think, okay, I can write a book, and then I wrote Win the Crowd. Then what can I
Mhm.
do next? And I made a TV show for the History Channel called Lost Magic Decoded, and that show did really well. The
Mhm.
opening launch uh, broadcast, I think it had like 1.2 million viewers. And
Wow.
so then, what can you do next? I'm thinking, I keep on trying to take it to the next, not the next
Mhm.
level, but the next stepping stone that makes an
Mhm.
interesting career. Because, like I'm not just looking at putting on a show. I'm trying to kind of handcraft or to hand mold this beautiful career that when I look back at when I'm in my my 90s or something, I'm able to look back and say, yeah, look at this interesting body of work that I've created. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to do, and it's like creating a legacy while you're still alive. Like
Yeah.
usually,
Legacy.
there's that great slogan or the great line in Hamilton from Lin Manuel Miranda, where he says, legacy is a planting seeds in a garden you never get to see, and
Mhm.
I really like that. It really resonates with me. Like I'm planting these seeds now, and who knows? Maybe down the line, 100 years from now, people will be looking at my show the way that we now look at people like Malini and Hofzinser and all these great heroes that we have.
As magicians, we get to follow the paths of other magicians if we choose, but we also get to paint our own paths. And one of the things that I'm so excited about in modern magic, there's so much magic and so many different directions, being showcased. One of the things I talk about all the time on the podcast is if you love writing magic scripts, but you hate performing magic, there's jobs for you. There's so many different ways to feature magic and to use magic and to mix magic with your other passions and other interests, and that we get to pick what we're doing with these abilities that we have. and
Sure
and
thing.
I think that coming up with bigger things, planning large, is great. It also paints a picture of your career and your journey that is different from other people. And it's how innovation happens, right? It's when somebody does something that has never been done before, or is bigger, or is something that is interesting to them because of things that are outside of doing it exactly because someone else did it,
Right,
verbatim.
right, right.
That's how innovation happens. And I'm always excited to see magic in places that it's never been before, which is
Yeah,
why I'm super excited about this graphic novel. Because first of all, it's very, exciting, very fun to read, very easy to read. The art is incredible. And it's also quite fun if you know anything about you. It's quite fun to read it because it's got information, little like nods to things that you would know in it. But again, most exciting to me is it is a mending between magic and another category that we don't see it happening often. And it's this is in it, like, this is what innovation is. So I'm a big fan of it. Can you talk a little about how this graphic novel came to be?
sure thing. So basically, um, remember I mentioned before about what am I going to do next? I thought, okay,
Mhm.
after I did Carnegie Hall, after I do this, what's the next project? And to be honest, I was getting a little bit bored. I love doing my show, but I always want to have something that's my next beacon. And I didn't want to do another TV show right away. I didn't want to do another stage show right away. And I looked into myself and thought, what do I love? And I really adored as a boy growing up reading Batman comic books.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, what? And on the spur of the moment, I said, well, I'm going to make my own comic book. And fortunately, I had some artist friends who worked at DC and someone who worked at Marvel. And I said, do you think you guys can help me find some artists to put together a comic book? And they're like, sure. These guys are not starving artists, but they're all the people who work in comic books are always looking for work. So I said, okay, I'll just make a comic book. I'll self-fund it. I'll find all the right people. And so I teamed up with a friend of mine named Keith Champagne. We wrote a script over the one summer. It took like 2 or 3 months. And then in the course of time, I found an artist. This guy draws for Daredevil. He's drawn Superman. He's drawn Shazam. This guy named Peter Krause. He's just sensational. And so
Incredible.
I got him involved. And then I said, okay, we need to get a colorist. I didn't realize how many people are involved in creating a comic book. Like, you read comic books as a kid, you kind of flip through those 16-page
Mhm.
floppy comic books in a heartbeat, but there's so many people involved in it. It's like a whole assembly line. And so then found a wonderful color artist, a colorist named Jordi Belair, who lives in Ireland. I invited all these people to come see me at the Waldorf so they could see what the show is all about, because I wanted the show and the book to complement each other. Even though the story
Mhm.
itself has almost like 99% fictional stories inside, I, there is, as you mentioned, some element of truth, and there are some parts where people might question, well, where's that line drawn between reality and fiction? But I did want it to look right in my showroom, because we're going to be selling these books after my show. And
Mhm.
also, I want people to come to the show to say, I want that book, and people who read the book outside of the showroom to say, I got to go see that show. So that it would help complement each other.
I think it's fantastic, and most importantly, again, I'm excited when magicians get to pair magic with something that's outside of magic, because it helps bridge the gap, and especially in the arts, and I think this is a really great direction, and it
Yeah,
was very
thanks.
fun to read, so
Yeah, thank you.
highly
And
recommend it.
I don't think that you've seen the digital edition. I don't think you've seen the hard copy
Yes.
of it, but it came out so beautifully. And I mean, I ended up self-publishing this book, which was it kind of threw me off, because I was expecting to have a major publisher come along and say, yeah, we'll put this out with, with a major title, major label. But the fact that I did it on my own actually gave me a lot more creative control. And now I'm looking back at it, I think that it was better off that I did it on my own. It took 3 years from beginning to end, from starting
Wow.
the concept to the actual physical product in hand. And because I'm not relying on this for my income, like, this is just a gravy. It's just for fun. So I was able to take my time and make every detail right. So even from like the front cover of it has all these cards flying around.
Mhm.
There's an image of me holding a samurai sword, and there's all these cards flying around me. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that every card in the stack is from the Pneumonica stack from Tom Murray's stack. So, like, if you go down there, and only if you have time, you play with little details like that. Otherwise, you just
Yeah.
kind of rush to print. And David Copperfield wrote the forward to the book, so that was really nice. And yeah, overall, this was a great experience. I'm holding it in my hand right now, and I look back at this with great joy, because it was a great project to work on.
Well, it's beautiful, and I really enjoyed reading it. Let's talk a little bit about Max Malini. So I know that you have a little bit of an obsession with him. Talk a little bit about why Max Malini has sort of caught your attention.
Right. So something I first came across him through the writings of Ricky Jay. So if you look at that Ricky's seminal book, Fireproof, Learned
Mhm.
Pigs and Fireproof Women, there's a whole chapter in there with stories about Max Malini, and that's through research that Ricky did that I had never come across before. And so for me, as a young teenager reading these stories, it was just revelatory. And and one of the things that appealed to me is that Malini didn't travel with lots of stuff, and I wasn't a big stage performer, I would carry a briefcase with me. And when I read the story about how Malini was hired to do a big show for a wealthy patron out in Long Island, and just came out there and was met at the train station by a driver who was expecting trunks full of equipment, Malini walked out with just a suitcase. And the driver said, "Well, where's all of your stuff for your show?" And he said, "Sir, I am the show." And that really stuck with me, because I thought, okay, if I can do the most with the least, then I've won. And I think that's what Malini really did. He did the most with the least. And he would be able to put on a full evening show with stuff that you could just pack in your pockets or just borrow from the environment. And I thought that that minimalistic approach was really beautiful, like to be able to do the cups and balls not with Sherwood cups, but with glass cups that were covered with a newspaper and wrapped around, so
Right.
that their insides were opaque. And still be able to do the same sort of Vernon routine and end up with the lemons under the cups. And it just seems like it's even more magical because it wasn't apparently prepared. And th- all of the legends of biting off the button, like I actually ended up carrying a whole bunch of buttons with thread, different types of buttons with different types of pieces of thread sticking out of them, so that I can, when I see someone wearing the right type of jacket, go into my case, pull out the right button. And then I wouldn't bite the button off their jacket, but I would just pretend to pull it off with my hands and then show them I was holding the button that matches their jacket with the same threads that are dangling down from it, and then just thumb palm it as I pretend to rub it back on. And it's tricks like that that have almost more impact than anything you can do in a fully staged show. So it just really appealed to me. And over the course of time, I thought, okay, maybe I should try to find more about who Malini was, where he grew up, where more, if I could find him more of his little known stories. And so, fortunately here in New York, we've got the New York Public Library. I started digging into their microfiche and found stories that hadn't been seen before. For example, there's one great story about how when Malini went to China, he found on the desk of one of the generals he was visiting a pencil. It was called a Koh-i-Noor pencil. And he happened to have a duplicate in his pocket. And I don't know if he prepared for it, if he just happened to have it, but these were not common pencils. So he borrowed the pencil from this general's desk, snapped it in half, and then put the pencil back together by using his duplicate. And it was a specific brand of pencil, one that you wouldn't ordinarily be carrying or have in that region. So imagine the impact of having something truly impossible happen. And that was purely because of the planning that Malini did, and also just the spur of the moment inspiration. So I just think there was something about that that really appealed to me.
So there's two different things that you touched on. You sort of summarized it right there at the end, which is both the planning and the spur of the moment. Is it the planning that makes it feel like spur of the moment, or
Absolutely.
is it both?
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, if the more you have in your toolbox, then the more you're able to play with the form, right? So,
Right.
if you have done a broken and restored pencil before, or a broken restored cigarette, or then when you come to that
Hmm.
environment, you have that form, or that template available to you. Um, but having, for example, I used to walk around, like I mentioned, with all those different buttons in my pocket, and I had a little case that I would keep them in, and like that gave me a little extra freedom. So I thought, here's a new trick I can do without really having to plan it. It would happen on the spur of the moment if I saw someone who had a matching button. And you see it and you say, okay, now's the time, now's the moment. You kind of grasp that moment.
You were talking about how exciting that idea of, well, I am the show. That what now is commonly referred to as pack small, plays big. But you're somebody who has his own venue, that you're performing in all the time. So what is the reason to sort of pack small when it's your room? Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
usually the pack
sure.
small
Yeah, there's yeah,
is
there's
to
a, there's a
travel.
great yeah, there's a great dichotomy there, isn't it? It's almost contradicts itself. So I'm not a traveling show, so I
Hmm.
don't have to pack small. In fact, I've had many magicians who have been deceived by the size of my show, because they don't realize I actually keep my equipment in 10 cases, like big, they're pretty big cases. But when you watch the show, it's very minimalistic as far as what's visible. So the props seem very minimal. I'm simply using cards, a coin, a hat, a brick, a teapot, um,
Right.
and pieces of paper, and it's almost like there's nothing there. And the fact is, there's a lot there.
Hmm.
From the programs people get on their chairs and the pens that are given. Everyone gets a souvenir, pen that's a silver pen. From all the glasses that need to be washed at the end of every show, and all of the napkins that are given out, and the sound system, and et cetera. So there's actually a lot more to it than is visible. I don't believe in pack small, play big. I think that, in fact, if it looks small, that's fine. But um, I wouldn't really care about whether it packs small or not,
Right.
because I'm always in the same location.
So one of the things there that I'm sort of pulling is the apparent the apparent usage versus the actual usage, which is that's
Right.
okay if you've got a contraption that feeds you cards when you open and close your legs, as long as everyone thinks that it's just a deck of cards.
Yeah, exactly. No, and go to any length possible. So, like, for example, like, I have this one table that is off to the side, that is so innocuous. It's just a completely innocuous table that I've built into this great gimmick, but it looks like it fits the room, and the table
Right.
itself is just it's a gimmicked table, but no one even thinks they don't even think twice about it. So I've had magicians say, "Oh yeah, you just travel with like a suitcase, right? You could probably take this act around the world."
Hmm.
Like, no, the answer is no. In fact, if I have to do the show out of town, it's a really big ordeal to get the show to move to other locations.
Wow. And I think that one of the things that is so apparent in a lot of your work, in your books and your magic and some of the things that you're saying now, is that what it looks like versus what has to happen behind the scenes are so different, are so different. The things look like they're spur of the moment, but they are heavily scripted. Things look like there's no tools required, but there's tables and gimmick boxes and things like that. And I think that magicians see the pros speaking as if they're coming up with the words on the spot, and they don't believe that they require that much preparation. And even myself, I know that the biggest thing that I think to myself when I try a new piece on stage and it doesn't work is, why did I do this? It was so not ready yet. Like, all of these things were not perfect yet, and I don't know why I thought that it would be ready by doing it. And I think that this preparation is plays such an important role. And what else can you tell us about that, and what people can do to maybe learn how much it takes, or what it takes, or how to
Yeah.
be so prepared?
Well, I mean, I had a great conversation about this with David Alexander. And David Alexander tragically died from an electrical accident years ago. But he was a real worker. He was, a student of Fraxon, and he was just a really sensational and highly intelligent magician. He's one of the people who were just hunting down Erdnase. You might be familiar with that whole
Hmm. Yeah.
area of study. And so, anyway, David Alexander wrote me a note once, and he said, "I understand how much work goes into creating your show. Everyone else seems to think that you just go there, do the show, and you work, like, a couple of hours a week. But I know that you're working 50 to 60 hours a week to be able to do that 1 hour show." And I called him up. I said, "David, yes, you are one of the people who understand that. It's a lifestyle choice.
Hmm.
And I mold my life around the show. So yeah, I'm working 5 shows a week, but they're all on Friday and Saturday. There's 2 shows on Friday night, 3 shows on Saturday.
So someone
And
would just to interject. Someone would obviously think, "How great! You have 5 days a week to do nothing."
exactly, no joke. And that's exactly what people
I
think.
know. Yeah, I
And
know.
and and the amount of work that I'm doing to prep for those 5 shows is pretty large. And in fact, I've had, over the course of 2 decades, tried to figure out how to best manage those 5 days. And what I don't like to do is wait till the last minute, because I remember what Chung Ling Soo said. He said, I love the performance, but I hate the infernal preparation. And that's like, is the part that's just it's part and parcel to what we do, right? Like, he used to have to fold
Mhm.
up all those little spring bills so that they'd be able to eventually come out on stage in this massive display of
Yeah.
of fake money. And so, it's that infernal preparation. If you wait to the last minute, it really is infernal. So what
Mm-hmm.
I've done is I've actually made a pattern for my life, which is that um, after the weekend of shows is over, I've got Sunday, which is when I reset everything for the following Friday. So
Oh wow.
this way, all of the physical stuff, like the stacking of a deck or the cleaning of the glasses or the getting the rising cards ready or whatever it is, like everything needs to be done the week
Well
before.
before,
So it's
yeah.
it's now that's like a breath I can take and not
Yeah.
have to worry about going back, because I used to wait till the day before or even the day of and say, okay, hey, I've got a show tonight, better get this stuff ready now. And there's bound to be something wrong, or
Of
maybe
course.
I've
Of
got two
course.
children at the time. One of the kids might say, "Oh, I have a tummy ache," or whatever it is, and suddenly you have to turn on your dad mode, and you're not able to focus on your work. So I really spend I kind of pay myself forward and get the reset work done right away, and then during the week I'm able to deal with other smaller details that need to get taken care of, but they're not physical; they're more the kind of logistical.
And what would you say to someone who would say, well, maybe years ago you put in all the work to come up with this act, but now you are probably taking, okay, maybe not Sunday because you're resetting your show, but 4 days a week off. What would you say to that person?
No, not hardly, because I'm still I'm always working on new material. The show has to evolve. If
Mhm.
you continue to do the same show for, I mean, again, I've done this show over 5,000 times. When I did the 5,000th show, Mayor De Blasio gave me a proclamation. He named it Chamber Magic Day in the city of New York.
That's
So
amazing.
it was pretty great, and I was really flattered. But the reason I say that is not to put myself up on a pedestal, but to say it's really easy to repeat the same show over and over again, but it's at the detriment of your audience's experience, right? So,
Mhm.
you know, I don't want to stagnate. I don't want the audience to say this guy's phoning it in. And we've all seen, performers, whether in or out of magic, who are clearly phoning in their act, and you don't want to purposely put yourself into that category just so that you can say I have 4 or 5 days off, right? So like I'm trying to grow, and I'm always thinking about how I can make the show better, whether that's something that needs to be tweaked in the performance. Maybe there's a prop that has been damaged, or maybe the prop needs to be improved. Maybe I need to work on a slight because I'm not happy with my top change. I need to work better on this top change because I
Mhm.
added a top change to my show recently. And maybe it's taking a whole trick out and putting something brand new in. Like I'm working on the vanishing bird cage right now. Like that's something that I really am putting all this effort into. So it's not for my own joy. This is going to be part of the show, and that's a joyous experience, is to play with it and practice it. But it's with the intent of actually putting it in front of a live audience. So yeah,
So
I'm
there's two
always I'm
things.
always working on it. And the other thing also is, the whole part about faking sincerity. If you could fake sincerity, then you've made it. But like I don't want to fake sincerity. I want every show to
Mhm.
really be a genuine experience. Like the comedian Andy Kaufman,
Mhm.
right? And the old, from
Yep.
Taxi, right? So,
Yep.
Andy Kaufman used to antagonize his audiences. He would
Mhm.
say stuff that would make them upset, or he would do something stupid, like he would, sit up on stage and read out loud a novel, like read The Great Gatsby or Moby Dick
Yes.
to the audience, and like that was his act. And people were like irate, and they would jump up on stage and want to punch him in the face, and that was his entertainment. So for me,
Mhm.
the show, like, I mean, I've been doing this show for a long time. I want to have fun too. I want this show to be my entertainment, because this is like me
Mhm.
going to the movies. The audience can say stuff that's going to make me have a good time. And so the way that I've actually structured the show to be able to make sure that those moments happen that keep me in the game is that I changed a whole segment from being. I used to have a book test that was a homage to Hofstadter, because Hofstadter used to end
Mhm.
his shows with a poetry book test type of mentalism act. And I was using some gimmick books, and I was able to always know what word people were thinking of. And for me, that was kind of too easy. It was too much of a drag. Like I could be thinking about what I was going to have for dinner while I was doing the show. I was like, oh, I wonder if I'll have pizza, or I'll have a
Mhm.
hamburger after dinner, after the show. And like the moment you can pull yourself out of the show and think about other things, you're in trouble. So
Mhm.
so I said, I've got to get something in the show that's going to keep me present. And so in order to do that, I have a 20-minute mentalism Q&A act which is
Mhm.
completely improvised, completely riffing, completely, by play. It's crowd
Different
work.
every show.
It's really like a comedian doing crowd work. And
Mhm.
now I have to really be present because, like, I'm scripting it as I'm going.
Mhm.
And that really brought me back. And that I've been doing that Q&A act now for probably about 10 years. It was the best thing I ever could have done to the show because now it keeps me excited every time I do the performance.
So there's a few things there. The first is one that I sort of got a little kick out of, which is, this idea that like, I'm working every Friday and Saturday night, so I have to have fun on a Saturday night too. But it's funny to me, but also like, yes, the show needs to be enjoyable for the magician. You can feel that as an audience member. You can see it in their face. And like you said, phoning it in. And I wanted to bring up other ways that it can be phoned in. And what I mean by that is what you were alluding to is, when you know your script cold and you're like blind and you're not there and you're phoning it in. But there's so many different ways to do magic, have people clap, have people like you, but be phoning it in, be not putting in the work that you need to put in. You can be doing a trick verbatim. You can be like you said, doing your act and not sort of paying attention. Whenever you think to yourself, that's good enough, or heck, they don't notice, or anything of that sort, that's you not doing your best and phoning it in. So I just wanted to bring that up because there's so many different ways that you cannot put 100% into your act, and putting 100% into your act often means using those 4 3 2 extra days a week that you have to make it better. The other thing, which is a big realization for me that's come in the last few years since performing professionally, and not only professionally but regularly, 20 some odd shows a month, is how much work it is, going home and looking at an act which you've done 100 times before, but looking at it under scrutiny again and saying, maybe I should say that word then and not then, or maybe if I did this at this point and at this point. And those seem like minute details. They are minute details, but that's
Mhm.
that's our job, right? That's what we're doing. That's how a trick gets better over the course of 5 years and 10 years. You can do the same
Sure.
trick for 2 years and have it not get better. It could get worse, and they do. Sometimes you start and everyone's laughing at your joke, and a year later it's the same joke, but people aren't laughing. And you're like, you
Right.
scratch your head, like, what is wrong that people aren't laughing at this anymore? But it's everything has changed. Everything
Yeah,
is
it
different. And
might
it's
also
about
be your expectations. Like because if you expect a laugh at a certain spot, then you actually tend to deliver it. You might tend to deliver it in a different way. Whereas
Mhm.
if you didn't expect the laugh at that spot, then it might be more genuine. And you know what I mean? Like you actually you're kind of crafting something that shouldn't be crafted. It should be left to be more natural. So I have, there's some jokes in the show where if I say it with a little bit of a coy expression in my voice, then it gets a laugh or it doesn't get a laugh. And you have to keep on tweaking it, just trying both ways. And that's just the luxury of working over and over again, right? Just being able to say like, okay, if I take this one word out or if I change this one word, the joke will get a laugh or not get a
Mhm.
laugh.
And that scrutiny is, what so much of the magic time goes to, let alone creating and introducing new effects, but it's that scrutiny of the stuff that you already do. Not only is that the answer to the question of what we spend our time on, but more importantly, it's the whole joy of this thing, right? The
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
point of being able to do magic, the reason why we all have ginormous bookshelves or drives or DVDs or whatever filled with tricks is because that's what we love. We love doing it. We love innovation. We love creation. We love, it's often a different layer or a different level of that you fall in love with when you become a performer. And it's no
yeah.
longer this gathering of magic. Sometimes it becomes, really editing something to its best. It could be, like you were saying, it's not finding a trick that excites you. It's finding a specific trick that is older that you can innovate with new methods that hasn't been seen. And those specifics, it changes what we like about magic depending on what we're doing. So if you're a
Yes, and then
performer,
one more thing to add to that is, is
yeah.
to listen. You must listen to your audience
Hmm.
because they'll tell you what's working and what's not working. And it's not always just about what I like to do and what I want. You know, as an artist, that's probably true. You do what you feel is in your heart and what you're trying to express to the world. But, as a showman, I also am listening to the audience and seeing what resonates with them and what what can I, how can I keep adding more things like that to my show that makes them excited? Because again, like I mentioned, the audience is who we're doing this for. I don't think we're just doing it only purely for ourselves, and the audience is also the one who's going to be telling their friends and their, their circles about whether they should, send their friends in. So, if you have something that appeals to the people, you'll be able to know how to next work on your act. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I did an interview recently with Pipo Villanueva, and he said something interesting, which is he said, the art is created between in that area between what the magician is trying to say and what the audience wants to hear. And it's our job as a magician to not just give them exactly what they want, but it's also we do have to give them, what they want. We can't just do whatever tickles us the most and tell them, to hell with it. And also for the audience, they're coming to a show, like you said earlier, to see something new and innovative, and creative. They want to see something different. They want to, but also, we can't just do something that makes absolutely no sense and say, "Ha, there you go, that's different." We have to share what we want to say as
Yeah.
an artist. So,
Right.
um,
When David Copperfield came to see my show, it was a real thrill because I used to have a David Copperfield poster up on my wall as a teenage boy,
mm,
looking up at him making the Statue of Liberty disappear. So seeing him in the front row of the audience was pretty mind blowing. And after the show was over, we talked for probably, I don't know, about an hour or so. And one of the things that resonated from our conversation was he said, "You can't write a script like for a show like this. You have to just listen to your audience, and you're clearly
mm.
doing that. You're listening to your audience, and they're telling you." What works, and you're able to tell the rhythms of what works based on what how the audience is responding to it. So I think that's one of the things. Just listening to your audience is a really key part. It's not. And on the other part, actually, I forgot to mention before, is having a partner or someone who's not necessarily a performer, but maybe a good writer, work with
Mhm.
you on your rhythms of your script. Because like I work with my best friend Mark Levy, who's a professional writer, and so we'll sit down and take a line and just dissect it and say, well, where does the emphasis go? How do we take this word? Should we put this word at the end of the sentence instead of halfway through? And it's all these little kind of minutia that helps to make the show a better final product.
So that was it's funny that you mentioned it. That was one of the last areas that I wanted to chat with you about, which was scripting and writing of your show. And I've found multiple times that recommendation exactly working with a writer or a director or all of them, but working with somebody outside of magic, but that has that set of skill is incredibly valuable. I want to hear a little bit about the process of scripting for you, and the reason I mention it, just so you can get a little bit of the context, is the answer to every question in magic is usually scripting. It's usually the answer to the question. And there's so many people that say, "Oh, I don't use a script," or "Oh, I don't need a script," or "I don't." And not only is that crazy to me, but one of the things that I like to reiterate to them is that how you build your script is different than whether or not you use your script. So I'm always very adamant about magician scripting and learning how to make that process as good as possible for them. So what's your process like for moving a trick into maybe I don't want to go from idea to show, but maybe from like, I have this trick, let's start writing. How does it go from there to show?
So obviously there's part of the script that needs to be the procedure and the demonstration or the explanation of the procedure, like stand over here, hold this, do the,
Hmm.
take a card, all that stuff. That's the easy part. It's the hardest part for what I've worked on with Mark, is creating um, kind of emotional hooks or
Hmm.
the lead-ins and the lead-outs. Um, if you're able to to work on and again, all of it, what we do is written. None of this is just like kind of pie in the sky, like, "Well, let's just say something and then that becomes
Hmm.
the script." That's not how we work. It's all it's all written down. I've got the entire show, which is it's a it's a 120 page document of of my show.
Hmm.
So like it's an actual script, like you'd have a script for a play.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've tried to do is to make the script sound the way I would typically talk. As you can tell, I'm not a very I'm more of kind of a casual speaker. when I do speak on stage, I sometimes add, some fancier flourishes and whatnot, but I try to make it sound like it's really me talking, because I want people to feel like there's a genuine connection, that they're not listening to someone reciting a script, but there's someone who's actually talking to them and with them. And I remember there was a time when I used to try to embellish the script by putting in little, antiquated words like may I prevail upon you to stand over here,
Right.
and like when you add things like that, it just, you sound like you're at a Renaissance fair, and
Hmm.
then you're automatically putting up a wall between your audience and yourself. So, to take you're asking, how do you take a trick from from page to stage?
Hmm.
And I think that what I like to do is look at the trick, say, what am I trying to tell a story about here? Why am I doing this? And can I incorporate something that's aside from the trick into this presentation? So, I remember one time performing for someone who was blind, and he said, even if I couldn't see the show, it just sounded good. It sounded interesting. It sounded like
Yeah.
a good, like there was stories in there. Like for me, every trick takes 8 minutes, between 8 and 9 minutes. So I'm in my show of an hour and a half. I'm really only performing like 9 or 10 tricks. It's not even like
Right.
there's not a lot of material in the show, because each piece is going to be like 8 or 9 minutes as a block. And so if you're going to say, okay, the trick itself may take 30 seconds or 5 seconds, like the vanishing bird cage, takes like 3 seconds, 3, 2, 1, boom, it's gone. But how can you make that into an 8 minute segment? There's ways to do it, and that's, by the finding what's interesting about the prop, about the story, about the interplay. um, None of that's left to chance, so what Mark and I tend to do is we look at it. I don't really have a formula that I can tell you or your listeners, but sometimes we'll say, oh, that would be an interesting way of leading into it, and then you start exploring that. And what Mark does, he does something he calls kitchen writing or free writing, and he just sits there and I sit there, and we'll put an egg timer on for let's say 3 minutes, and just write anything that comes to mind, whether it's
Hmm.
related or not, and just keep on riffing and riffing and riffing and riffing. And then at the end, you turn the 3 minute timer off, say, okay, what have I got here? And then you might find that there's like one phrase in that 3 minutes worth of writing that's valuable or usable. And
And
then
are
we
you guys
take from that
riffing with each other or independently?
independently, and then we'll come back to each other, because we
Right.
don't even live in the same town, so we don't see each other as often, but we talk on the phone daily. So, and this has been
Wow.
going on for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like he knows me better than I know myself, and vice versa. So, like, also he's seen the show develop from nothing to what it is today, and therefore, like, we have a lot of history, like kind of joint
Hmm.
history or like shared history.
Hmm.
And there's a shorthand that we also have between each other. So like he'll just mention something, and suddenly that just spurs a whole
Right.
memory of another path to take.
And it also helps to know somebody who knows that history so that a step or an edit or a change to a show is not a step backwards, but it's a step forwards, right? He knows
Right,
where
because we
you've
right
been.
because we've already tried that. We've already done that. We
Right.
already discarded that.
And you can
Yeah,
say, "Oh, we tried that in this version XYZ." Oh, yeah, I remember. And
exactly.
that's really helpful. The last part of this, which is just something that I always wonder when with numbers as high as this, but I've found even recently, and that's one of the reasons why I started seriously adding some new magic and seriously altering my magic. That you do the same set like 1,000 times, and you start to your eyes glaze over, right? And you like it doesn't feel the same anymore. So you've done this like 5,000 times more now. What like how do you not get bored? Is it just about constantly innovating and making sure that you sort of focusing on something new in each performance? Is there another secret that you tell yourself before the show or during the show to help really be in the present moment and not feel like you're reciting a script that's been
Right.
recited 4,000 times before?
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny because I remember when I was in high school, my acting coach was a really great acting teacher named Phil Stewart. Would make us do the same show, and we would do like a Shakespearean production, or we'd do a musical 3 to 5 times a weekend, and and he would always tell us, go out there and think to yourself, this is fresh, this is fresh. And so
Hmm.
he'd always tell us, make it fresh. And that was always something that that kind of just stuck into my head as a teenage actor. on stage. So when I'm backstage in my shows, I'm not thinking to myself, I got to make it fresh. But I'm thinking is these people here are expecting something great. And
Hmm.
it's really up to me to fulfill that. And so I can't remember who wrote this, but I remember reading it a while back about, imagine there's a little boy in the audience who's been looking forward to this show for months, and he's finally come to the magic show. And then you go out there and you blow it off because it's one of your thousands of shows. You're just
Right.
crushing that kid. You're crushing that kid's dream. And so, of course, I don't have any children in the audience, but I've got all these adults who are, they're planning this thing out months in advance, and like they're saying
Hmm.
to themselves, "I'm going to go see the magic show," and they're really excited about it. So, like, for me, I feel like an obligation to give them my best. And so, and maybe it sounds silly or corny, but I just feel like I want to do a good job. Like I also never know who's going to be in the audience. Maybe there's a billionaire in the audience sitting next to just some casual person, or maybe there's a reporter there, or maybe there's a celebrity there. And I don't know that until I walk out. So I walk out there thinking this is going to be the greatest show of my career every time. And
Hmm.
it's not because I'm convincing myself of that. It's just because I have a genuine desire. It's hardwired into me since I was in high school to make each show fresh.
And I really like that, thinking that there's a boy in the crowd who's been waiting for this, or building up to this, or and it's very easy to forget that a 10,000th performance for you is still the first viewing for literally every person in your audience.
That's right.
And that is so important, because you forget it, you forget who you're performing for. Sometimes it feels like it's just you up there, like just saying your own lines, talking to yourself, just sort of doing the whole thing for yourself. But it's not. It's for the people that came to the show and are super excited to be there. And I love that. Before we start getting to some of the wrap up questions, which there are just a few of, I wanted to talk very quickly about your work with Tenyo. That was something that I didn't know that we were speaking about before we started recording, that you've been doing the writing for the English instructions for, I think you said 21 years.
That's right. So basically, what happened was Gary Ouellette, who is one of your fellow Canadian countrymen, passed
Hmm.
away. And when he passed away, he had been working previously as the English instruction writer for Tenyo. Um, the Tenyo team came to me through an introduction from Mark Ducati, and we were at the FISM. I think it was in Dresden. I don't really hang out with at many magic conventions anymore because with my work schedule on the weekends. But I used to go to conventions quite a bit. So I was at the FISM in Dresden, and it just so happened that the Tenyo team was there, and they said to me, "Look, we heard that you speak Japanese. Would you like to work with us on translating the Tenyo instructions?" So I thought, sure, I can translate Japanese into English without any trouble. I've been doing that with contracts and patents, like I mentioned to you before.
Hmm.
So, and not only that, I love Tenyo tricks. I've been collecting them since I was a boy, with squeeze play and the money machine and all the Tenyo tricks from the '70s that I was a collector of. Um, this would be like a great honor, right? So they sent me the first line of products. I think it was in 1999, 1998. I can't remember. 1998, I think it was. And yeah, that would make
98 makes
yeah,
it 21
that would be
years.
21 years. So it was 1998, and they sent me all of the new Tenyo tricks. I was the first Westerner, to receive them. So there was everyone else around the world hadn't seen these yet. I'm the only kid who has
Wow.
these new Tenyo tricks,
New
and
stuff for the Chamber Magic Show.
no, well, they're a little bit too small,
I'm
but
just
they're
kidding.
super clever stuff. And I was like, one of the tricks was
Yeah.
from Lubor Fiedler, one of them was from Jeff Sheridan, and then the other tricks were all invented by the Tenyo team. And then I was like, wow, this is great. And I translated them into English. They liked my work, and then we just continued doing this every year. So I'm always the first Westerner outside of Japan to get these products shipped directly from Tenyo. Sometimes they send me their prototypes. I've had like some ones that haven't even been fully formed yet, and I get to play with them before anyone else. So it's like the newest of the new toys. And then I not only get those, but I also get the fully packaged ones. So I have like doubles of every Tenyo trick for the past 21 years,
Wow.
which is kind of a ridiculous collection because I
Listen, I
don't
think
perform
it's a
them.
very exciting collection.
No, it's great, and I love it. I mean, and the Tenyo people are super great to me. They take good care of me, and also it connects me to my childhood and my love of like the gadgets of magic, because some of
Mhm.
these devices are super clever. Like I remember
Oh
working with
man.
the ones that Angelo Carbone put out. It was called Mini Morphosis, which is basically like, it's like a metamorphosis but on a small scale, where like a
Yeah.
red ball and a white ball change places inside of a trunk. um, and the other joy is I get to come up with the titles for them. So all the
Oh wow.
titles for the Tenyo tricks over the decades have been
Oh
mine
wow.
for the past 20 years, 21 years.
That's awesome. Not only because it, just tickles me as a magician to know that, so many of the Tenyo things that I've loved playing with pass through your hands and your translation. But the thing that I wanted to forward and that is clear between, that and the graphic novel and just your work in general is that, and this is something that I've mentioned before in this episode already, but pairing up your other interests or putting those things together in different avenues, it adds much more to your life than just a potential other stream of income or whatever, right? This is the joy of what we get to do. So I would just encourage anybody who has skills outside of magic and are in magic to take a moment and think about how those things can pair together. You could be anything, and I was going to say you could be the next Tenyo translator, but we got one, so we're all good. But
Yeah,
but
yeah,
but really, what I mean to say is you could have a job that we didn't even know existed. I didn't know Tenyo translator existed until you told me about it.
yeah. Good point all around. And yeah, and and the other part also is not. The other point I think is to not focus on the money, because
Hmm.
if you're doing it because you think I'm going to become rich or I'm going to make a lot of money on this, like you're not doing it for pure enough reasons. Like I don't. All of the projects I do now, I mean, I've become very very comfortable doing what I do. But I don't do it for the money. Like the graphic novel, I did it because I wanted to do it. Like I
Hmm.
had this kind of, I couldn't not be doing it, because once I had the idea of making a comic book, no matter what it cost, even if it was going to cost me, $100,000, I'm going to put that into it because I believe in this project and this whole concept. Will I ever make it back? Who knows? Maybe yes, maybe not. When I'm creating a new trick for the show, if it costs me thousands of dollars for a prop that may never even be seen, I'm willing to do that. And it's not because of the money. It's because I care about the product, the final experience of what it's going to feel like and what my life is going to be like with that in it. So like I've money for me is not really a motivator as much as it used to be, and I'm willing to take risks and do things that may cost me a lot, but at the end of the day, it ends up with a great experience or a great story.
I love it. And I think that's a great place to start wrapping up. We've got a few wrap up questions, things that we ask every guest on the way out, just to, hear their thoughts. So the first is talking a little bit about modern magic. So, what is something going on in Magic 2018, 2019 that you like, and something going on in Magic that you don't like right now?
Oh boy. I don't really think about that very much, to be honest with you. I don't really spend much time with um, magicians, but I
Hmm.
do watch, things that are on television and on the internet. I'm not a big fan of the videos that people put out of just moves and cardistry for its own sake. Like, I'm a performing magician, which means that I'm used to the interplay with an audience. And
Hmm.
so if a young person is going to spend a lot of his or her time on mastering sleights, I say go for it, because I was that kid too. I mean, I
Hmm.
mastered. I've got a pretty good handling on a classic pass and on a diagonal palm shift and all
Hmm.
these great multiple shifts, and like coin vanishes, and I've got some pretty good chops. But much of that actually is in the background when it comes to the
Right.
actual bigger picture of putting on a show. So like I would encourage young people who are focusing purely on their technique to definitely continue with that, because it couldn't hurt. It won't hurt to be able to do that stuff when you're older, but to look down the line and say, well, how am I going to put that into a performance? I mean, unless that was your means to an end, like, or that was your goal all along, is just to be able to say, look, I've got this great sleight, and I can do 1,000 of these different great sleights. You have a whole, like, a jewelry box full of great sleights. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
wonderful. But I think that you know magic is a performing art, so you have to be able to put that into the context of a larger show. So I've always thought of magic as being a presentational form as opposed to a collection of sleights. So I hope that younger people would put that into, would be able to see that there's a bigger picture than just their
There's more
hands,
to it.
their hands on a YouTube screen or their hands on an Instagram screen. Um,
Totally.
but what do I like about magic? I like that people are going to magic shows.
Mhm.
I feel fortunate that even in New York, there are other magicians who are looking at what I'm doing and saying, "Hey, this is something that is now accepted." So, like, there are other magic shows not only in New York, but at hotels in Chicago and hotels in San Francisco and hotels
Mhm.
in London, and a lot of these guys have taken inspiration from me, and that's really flattering. Um, I don't like when people have stolen my show or material from my show or have stolen the title. Even one guy in Germany took the title Chamber Magic, which I have copyrighted and trademarked rather here in New York, in America, and said, I'm going to call my show Chamber Magic, and I had to shut that down. Um, but the fact that that magicians are saying, okay, I don't have to wait for someone to pick me to raise my hand. I can actually raise my hand myself and just put myself out there and try making a show and try putting on a production. I think that's great. And the more great magic that's out there makes people want to see more great magic. So, you know, of course, televised magic is on the rise with Penn and Teller and all those other shows that you
Mhm.
mentioned. But for me, like, I really like the live, intimate parlor shows format. For me, that's really how magic is best seen, when there's fewer than 100 people in the room and everyone has like eye contact with
Mhm.
the magician to
Intimate.
see each other. That intimate type of performance is for me what magic is all about. When I used to see people like Slidini live, and people like Al Goshman live, and I used to see their shows in person, like I felt like they were talking to me, and I wanted people to give
Mhm.
that back to my audiences. So when I see other you know modern magicians um, taking my model, that makes me very happy. And
Totally.
I wouldn't say I want them to take my show, but to say that they can go out there and put themselves out there and to try something to make magic more visible to the public, it just makes it more appealing
Totally.
all around.
And to comment on that specifically is I like not only that there's all these magic shows, which by the way has been a very popular highlight for people in that question, which is exciting because it means that there really is that trend. But also like you said that they're intimate magic shows and that they're people aren't I mean there are people launching large scale magic shows, but a lot of the ones that we're seeing now are experiences for 20 to 100 some odd people, which is incredible because it
Yeah,
means that people are experiencing magic right in front of their faces intimately and like you said, it feels like the magician is looking and talking directly to them because they are because there's
yeah,
only
yeah.
whatever 60
Yeah,
people in the room.
there's a quote in Richard Kaufman in Genie. I'm just pulling this out from something I wrote. He wrote something really nice about me, which he wrote. There seems to be a recent outbreak of good magicians performing one man shows. Anyone doing this in a hotel venue has Steve Cohen to thank, since his chamber magic created the modern template. Once you have a person who does this type of thing successfully and in a classy way, then others will find an easier path to acceptance and create their own shows. And I thought that was well put. And I of course I appreciate the call out from him. But at the same time, like I think that the key is that, like, you have to try to make it into a a classy experience, so that people feel like they're going to something which is a destination. Like, when people are
Mhm.
coming to see chamber magic, I'm competing against not other magicians in New York, but I'm competing against Hamilton. I'm competing
Right.
against the Metropolitan Opera. I'm competing
Right.
against Carnegie, whoever is performing at Carnegie Hall. If it's like Joshua Bell or someone, like, these are like the world's best artists are here in New York. So I'm not competing against the other magicians that are out there doing their acts. I'm competing against how the tourists and the locals can spend their entertainment dollars, right? So like, I feel like my act has to be at that par or that level, and that's what inspires me. So like, I'm just glad that other magicians are out there doing their work. And I even wrote a new book which is coming out by the time this podcast airs. I wrote a book called Evergreen, which actually discusses this exact topic of how to make yourself into an act, or how to create a show that would become an institution in your own town. And I think that this book will have some relevance to a lot of people who are always thinking, like, how can I get away from being a gigging magician to being
Mhm.
like the destination where people come to me as opposed to me coming to them?
It's so I mean, I know you just sort of mentioned it, but let's talk a little bit about plugs. I got a chance to take a peek at that book and hold it in my hands at Magi Fest when some of the first copies were there, and it's really quite beautiful. And but being put up by Vanishing Ink. So I
Right.
know that you've got a whole bunch of things now. You've got Win the Crowd, you've got the graphic novel, you've got Evergreen. Talk a little bit about these projects and where people can find them.
Well, I mean, all these are just for me are just fun. Like I don't, I just do these because they're interesting to me. The fact that people like them for me is a plus, and I'm always flattered when I get nice responses or good feedback from people. But the book Evergreen will be on Vanishing Ink's website. I'm not going to be selling that myself, but Vanishing Ink is going to be putting out a series of essays, and this is one of them. And then the graphic novel is called The Millionaires Magician. So that's actually on its own micro website, which is called themillionairesmagician.com. You could also get it on Amazon, but it's probably easier to get it through themillionairesmagician.com. Um, and there's like a free um, preview that you can look at. You can flip through some pages. You can see some cool graphics and stuff from there. And if you like it, you can order that online. You can also order the digital edition, but it's much cooler to hold the actual thing in your hands because it's just a really beautiful book. And then let's see what else. When the Crowd is on Amazon. You can get it as an ebook, or you can get it for the hard copy or maybe the paperback still. But that's been out for probably about 13 or 15 years for now. So you can still find copies of that around. And then, of course, my show is Chamber Magic, and the website's chambermagic.com. And you can watch videos on there. You can see when I was on Letterman. You can watch the Letterman video. You can watch other cool clips and whatnot. I've made some short films that are on there. So yeah, I've got a bunch of stuff online. And then there's articles about me on the New York Times website and other cool articles here and there. So like I said, I've been doing this for a while. So if you type in my name into a Google search, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff like Vanity Fair and all these other interviews that I've done. And I'm also really accessible. So people who want to reach out to me, it may seem like I'm this kind of this mogul who does things on a higher level, but I just feel like I'm a workman magician, like a workaday magician who just works really hard and just keeps at it and keeps trying. And I'm always, it's like it's like the little mouse in the maze. Like the mouse can't find the cheese, so he just goes another route. And like I keep on trying to find that cheese, and I'm just trying all different avenues.
And I think that all three of these are incredible resources, and as well as the show, which I'm very excited to go see the next time that I am in New York. The very last part of this. Of the wrap up questions is a highlight. So people have been listening to us talk for nearly 2 hours now, and we've touched on a whole bunch of different topics. So for me, I thought one of the biggest highlights was talking about feeling good about your audience, before a show, and especially for workers out there who are doing the same act, saying the same lines, going through the same motions. That it's a really big challenge to feel fresh and to put on your best of a show. So I thought that the advice about thinking that there's a young boy in the audience who's been excited about this for weeks, but as well as just the mentality to feel that way is great. And like you mentioned, adding tweaks and little bits and changes to your show, or doing your whole performance with something else in mind, like thinking about your posture or the way you're smiling or the way you're speaking or enunciating or whatever, allows you to do the same thing, but in a different light, feeling more aware and really caring about your audience. So those were big highlights and take home points for me. What do you think is particularly important or the most important for people listening for you?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's a tricky question because we kind of covered a lot of areas in this conversation, and I had a lot of fun with this conversation with you. So thanks a lot for reaching out.
Thank you.
I think we talked about business, and we talked about magic, and we talked about a lot about business only because people seem to think that's my area of expertise. But I think that that's actually like the least of my areas of interest. So I think that the key is from this conversation at least is to just do what is great magic. Like people really care
Mhm.
about, people are interested in magic now. There's like real joy that people find in magic. So like do the best possible magic you can possibly do, and then try to find a structure or a format to be able to present it as often as you can. And even if it's at great personal expense, like do whatever you can, because maybe down the line there might be some great spoils that you can reap from that. But in the meantime, like in the beginning, I think it's mostly about focusing on the product and like making the best possible magic. Like I put everything, I didn't mention this during our conversation, but I put it through like what I call the wizard filter. Like, is this something that a wizard would do? Is it something that like is so impressive that people are going to just their minds are
Right.
really blown, because like, it can't possibly have been done any other way except for this guy is a wizard. And if we just give enough thought to our work, and also the other thing I like that I mentioned is that concept of make no small plans. Just think
Mhm.
about, how can I make this the biggest, best, most appealing possible version of what I'm working on, so that it's it has legacy, it has legacy value.
Totally. And I love that. I like, planning big, not making small plans. What you just said, which I think showcases a lot of from this episode, is doing the best magic that you can, and as often as you can. But really just thinking about, looking at your magic and saying, is this the best that I can do? And can I do better? Can I put more work into this, more oomph? Can this be better? That's a question that we constantly have to be asking ourselves, because oftentimes when you show someone magic, you're the only person who's ever showed them that, or you're the first person to, or so on and so on. And it's important that we make a really good impression. So I
Yeah, for
really
sure.
love that. And thank you so much. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and a big thank you to everybody at home who joined and listened in on talking and to us talking about everything under the sun for magic. And as always, we will see you all next Thursday. Well, there you go. I hope that you enjoyed the episode, and I hope that you learned something. Particularly, I loved thinking about how to care more about your magic and how to care more about your audiences. So take a moment and think about what you can do in your next performance to show your audiences that you care, both for yourself and for their sake. And as well, a big, huge thank you for listening to this episode, and I'll catch you all online, and I will see you next Thursday. Peace.